Okay. So one of the things I want to point out is that it's important to know who it is you're presenting the temperament to. If I've got, and Caroline has seen this, when I've had my supine sanguines, I go a little light. I go more relational fun. When I have cholerics, I go a little more of a business approach. And then I get melancholies, I go pretty clinical. They need to see how it all fits, why it works that way. They're really asking a lot of questions, and I find that they really are helped by that. But what I do hope to achieve with everybody in doing temperament is I tell them at the outset, I want to, you're going to get an overview of the 5 different kinds, and I want you to see how they're uniquely different, but then also we'll pinpoint where you are and we'll chart you. So that's the goal that we have there. But as I begin teaching temperament, I start out by saying, guys, there's our personality, and then there's our temperament, and they're different. Our temperament is clearly seen in young people before they've learned behavior that they have a bent. And the Bible teaches, and we believe this strongly, that in your mama's belly, you're already uniquely formed, fearfully and wonderfully made. And in that, we're not talking about our current day behaviors as much as we're talking about our motivations, our needs, and what drives us from deep within us. Because in counseling, we're very much more interested in that internal world. Many times we're not even aware of it. And I will tell clients that this isn't something we go around often thinking about. I have now since I've learned this, but people don't. Now our clients will start thinking about this because it becomes something that I encourage them. Watch yourself. See yourself, how these things impact you out here. But temperament is very much who you're designed to become, what your motivations are, and your personality is very much what you've learned. And there's nothing inherently bad about that unless you get very far apart in what you need. Because when you really get far apart from what you need, you can begin to experience struggles. And that over time leads to the wilt. And we talk a little bit about that. And so what I usually do, folks, and let's see if this will show up on here, is I'll draw my faces. My faces are designed to be little placeholders. I've never done one this big. This is like Wheel of Fortune, man. That show is still on. Pat Sajak is like 65 years old. I didn't realize that, but he was around when my grandma was around.
I know.
And I always like my poker player in the middle. He's just chill Bill, right? All things like, oh. Okay. And so this will often be on the board before they come in, so I don't have to take the time to do all this because I can get in a hurry. And I've begun to play with the idea of not even writing the words, but just doing initials, just because I don't need them to memorize. Okay. And then I do I, C, A. And I'll talk about that. So what I tell them at first is these are our 5 different temperaments, and these are just simply placeholders right here to represent different categories of people, but there's over 3,000 variations and combinations of how people can be combined up here. But these are our placeholders to begin. And what I want us to do by way of overview is I'm just going to give you some characteristics of what each of these will look like typically when they're in their drives or in their needs in these 3 distinct areas. So let's talk about these 3 areas real quick. The first area is inclusion, and sometimes I'll write inclusion. And inclusion encompasses it's our social energies, and it's also in the area of our mind, which includes thinking and various other things, but those are 2 big categories I start with. Our social energies, or our battery. Like I say, some people are charged with socialization and some people are not charged by socialization. So socializing is a big part of this. So as we start, let's just stay in the inclusion realm for a moment. And let me take you through each of these 5 and how they may appear in their inclusion zone. So a sanguine, for example, is way up here in this area. They're charged intently by people. They love people. Their battery goes berserk. They love to be around people. They love to socialize. Oh, they love activity. They're energized by change. They really enjoy spontaneity, colorful, and they're very expressive socially. You'll meet them and they are very, very vocal, visible, and you'll find that they're very, very, easy to spot in a crowd. They just love people and they'll love you.
Extroverts.
Total extroverts, yeah. And for our purposes here, you're going to see the imaginary 0 and 9. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but this will come into play a little bit later. But this is our expressed, and this is our wanted, from 0 to 9. And what you'll find, if you're a 9-9 sanguine, boom, you're all the way at the top of the chart. So if you're up here, I'm like your bright light. You are Niagara Falls, baby, on display, woo! And the needs are intense as far as social goes. You got to be out and going and going and going and going. But what about their mind? Their mind, they're always thinking about what's the next fun thing, the next active thing, their attention's very short. And so they're not going to sit and think deeply. They're much more spontaneous and ready to move on to the next thing. But how about our friend the choleric? Well, the choleric is not charged socializing. In fact, they really are more focused socially on aligning themselves to accomplish things, because what really energizes them is the power and accomplishment. They love to see a vision accomplished. They are very big on able to grab ideas and see it through. So they will walk into a room full of people and they'll recognize this person can help me and this person can help me, and they will use people to accomplish things. Now that sounds bad, but it's not, because politicians use people to get them elected so they can lead people and help. CEOs do that, but the choleric is designed to be the lead person in their sense that they see people as a way to get things done. And they're happy when they do that, but they're not energized by people. In fact, people drain them, but their mind is focused on how can I get the next things done? I'm a hammer, you're a nail. That can be the tendency of the choleric. They are sure in their own skin, and they have a way, a place they're going, and they don't need your feedback. They're very much intent on where they're going. So their mind is from point A to point B. They're very much into the black and white in the task, and they have a clear path to get there. So they're very, very much secure in that. Our phlegmatic is all things balanced, equal, and fair. And so their social energies, they're not greatly charged by people either. In fact, people drain them. And so they will they'll be more observant in a crowd. They can be social, but for short spurts, but they're more observant. They're keen on keeping things in the middle. The bubble likes to go in the middle. They don't like to go to extremes. So phlegmatics are great calmers, and they are very much wanting to have things work together. Their mind is focused on how can we get something done with the least amount of energy and effort. They're much into efficiency, and they have an effect on all the other temperaments, if you will. And we'll talk about that in the blends for a minute. But for now, the phlegmatic in inclusion, I have a friend who's a phlegmatic in inclusion, and here he is. Hey man, how's it going? How are you? Good. How was that movie? What, cool? That's all right. They never go high or low. They're just kind of like, And so, but here's the thing. Something could crash over there and they go, oh, wow. And they go over there and they'll help. They never get really shocked and so when they're around someone who's panicky, they're very calming. So in fact, if they go up onto an accident scene, they slow down and calm down. They have this ability to handle situations that are chaotic. That's a gift, but they can't be motivated. They're very, very difficult to be motivated. That's in the will area. We'll get there in a second. All right, how about our friend the melancholy? The melancholy is drained by people. Their iPhone batteries do not get charged. They drain quickly, but they're charged by doing tasks. They are Pac-Man eating dots. They love to connect and get the next dot done, and they love to do that in an efficient manner. So people oftentimes can get in the way unless they're that one person or that small group that they know. So the melancholy's mind is charged by getting the next task done perfectly, and they're very passionate about that. But people, unless they're super known, will drain them pretty quickly. and they tend to tire throughout the day. So you won't find the melancholy going into a room full of people and being excited about it. They tend to walk into a room full of people they don't know, and they'll get one-on-one, and they'll get very task deliberate and oriented because they know they'll get drained unless they're the person presenting, and they can do that very, very well. But their mind, let's talk about that for a moment. The mind is incredibly intense. It never stops working. It is always on, especially right before they go to sleep. They're thinking, thinking, thinking. And it's incredibly, incredibly important what the melancholy feeds their mind. If it's something fearful or negative, it can supersize. Their mind has an ability to supersize things. So the melancholy is very, very powerful in their mind region. It's their superpower, but it has to be learned to harness. You have to learn to harness that. And we will talk much more in detail about their mind. It is their greatest strength, and it can be their greatest weakness. And then the supine, our sweet supine, oh, they love socializing, but they love tasks. So we have a bit of a hybrid version here because they can get charged by talking to people, but then they get tired, and then they go to do a task, and then they recharge, and then they go back to people, and they can bounce between the two, which is unique to them. No other temperament really does that as well. So supines can study for an hour, and then they have to get up and walk around and talk to someone, and then go back and study for another hour, and they can walk around and talk to someone. So they're unique in that, but they don't stay still all day at one thing. They have to move around. So their social energies can be both, and they love people, but they don't approach people. They need to be invited. They're very shy and indirect with that. So oftentimes their social needs go unmet, and I find a lot of supines behaving like melancholies. They get very serious, especially in counseling, and they get very focused, but it's oftentimes when they're in that smaller region and their number where they seem to be behaving more like a melancholy. But they have a heart of a sanguine. They love people. They want to be included. And they're really a party waiting to happen, but they're super sincere and sweet. And I would say one word that describes them is super authentic and genuine. They love it when people are that way. They don't do political things very well in their mind. They just love genuineness. Their mind, I believe they're always thinking about how they can better themselves and how they can care for those around them. They're super happy when others are pleased. When people are happy, they're happy. And that has a trap involved in there, as we know that can be codependent, but they're not born codependent. They're born very caring, and if they can harness that well, they can do that well. So they love to please, they love to care, they love to serve, and sometimes they need to be reminded to take care of themselves. That's the last person they'll usually take care of. Okay, so that's the inclusion part. So the control piece is now something where we shift gears and we move from our thinking and our social to engaging our gear and making stuff happen. So this is the region of like, how much power do I need? How much influence do I need? And also, how much do I need coming back, right? And it's decisions, but so much more. The will is what we are presented with so much with people because it's the steering wheel of our life, essentially. And each of these look different in the area of the will. So let's start where we left off with Mr. or Miss Supine. They are, when we have to go eat, and we're deciding where to go, the supine is about wherever y'all want to go is fine with me. Really, please don't make me choose, because their stress level goes up when they have to be responsible for the outcome. They're not designed to feel comfortable being responsible for the outcome. So if you have a client and they're supine in control, they like to have someone around them to help them feel confident in their decision that they're making, but they don't want to be controlled. Very important. They just want input. But if let's go all the way across and let's look at Mr. Choleric, because they're complete opposites. And by the way, if you didn't know this, they're opposites and they're opposites. And here's our joker in the middle, who's all things balanced. So the choleric is very much assertive. So we're going to go to this restaurant and you will like it. Trust me, because I know. They're they're comfortable with the buck stopping with them. Their responsibility, they say, put it on my shoulders and we can carry it. I can call the play. I can say no. I'm good with responsibility. So give it to me. In fact, get out of my way and I'll take it, because they need control, because they see how it can work. Their minds work that way. So they crave that, which can be the opposite of the supine. But Let's talk about our poker player in the middle, Mr. Phlegmatic, in control. The control piece with them is sometimes they'll take control, sometimes they won't. So there can be yes and no, and it often looks like the shrug of the shoulders. Whatever. But that is an answer in and of itself. It's often related to sarcasm. They have a witty sense of humor that's sarcastic, which is deflective. You ever tried to pin Jello to the wall? That's a phlegmatic. And when you have the phlegmatic involved, they can't be controlled. It's not possible to control a phlegmatic. They will slip through your fingers like a jellyfish. So the one temperament that struggles with trying to control is the choleric. The choleric likes to control things, and the phlegmatic frustrates them. That's why I nicknamed them the donkey, because the donkey will sit down stubbornly and they won't move. They won't change their mind, and they won't change off of what they want to unless they're ready to. They can stubbornly believe things that are wrong or right, and they can stubbornly behave in ways that are wrong or right. And so when we see them as clients and they're phlegmatic in control, they will be stubborn, especially if you give them homework. They're difficult to motivate. And so it's very important to know that. They can be doing bad things for a long time, and God will even want to blast them out of that. And even the blends have a part in that. So we will talk a little bit more. But how about the sanguine in control? So the sanguines are super, super military or self-indulgent, but they're not always both at the same time. So when the sanguine's on and they're feeling fired up, in control, they take charge, they put everyone on their back, and they can go with gusto. They have lots of energy and vigor. But if they get stressed or they get offended or their feelings get hurt, they can swing to completely toss off the responsibility and say, no, y'all do it, and they'll pout. And they will become self-indulgent and almost become this completely other person. It sounds bipolar, but it's not. It's just the swing. But then they get their mojo back 5 minutes later and they're back to military again. So the sanguine swings. They can be completely on and then completely off. There's becoming more and more sanguines in control, I'm noticing. Lots more of those recently. And the swing is prevalent for them to know that some days they're going to be on, some days they're going to be off. And maybe they need to manage that stress of what can cause them to go that way. But now let's go all the way over here to the complete opposite. The melancholy in control is very, very different than the sanguine. The melancholy is very much needing to figure things out for themselves in independence. They are super self-reliant, independent, and they love, I call them the hourglass, because a decision that needs to be made has to go through the sands of the hourglass, and I don't care how much you shake it, it's not going to speed it up. In fact, we have the hourglass over here, and this is a great illustration of the melancholy decision-making process. And I think folks would benefit from knowing this is what it's like for the melancholy as they're thinking. In sessions, it's slow and it drives sanguines and cholerics and supines and others crazy if they don't know this, because they'll go to shake it and it doesn't speed anything up.
That's a good illustration.
It doesn't, and so for the melancholy, it just makes them mad. Why are you shaking? Because they need time to let the grains go where they need to go. And they have to process it and it has to filter through, because they need to look competent and in control and together, because they're very put together and they need that. If you have them in session and their spouse is making them feel foolish, it's going to crush them and it's going to make them very angry, and they will get back. So the melancholy works hard to do the right things the right way. If you meet a melancholy in control in as far as any task, if they're a mechanic, they're going to be a master mechanic. If they're a counselor, they're going to be a master counselor. If they're a teacher, they're a master teacher. Why? Because they spend their weekends doing this. They study, they show themselves, and they will tune out the world to get this right, because it's super important for them to know what they're talking about. And it creates for them an expectations for you to know what you're talking about. So they limit their teachers to experts. I love asking melancholies, who would you suggest I go to for this? Because they've done their homework and they've filtered out the phonies. They filtered out the people who haven't done their legwork. They can spot people who are phenomenal experts at stuff. So one of their gifts to the world is that. I'm married to one, so I kind of know this. And then we've just recently moved, and this has been broken in 5 million places because there's been no real, there's just been too much going through it. And so my wife's out there, pray for me. But as it is, this is one decision. What do I buy? Which can of soup do I buy at the grocery store? And all you got to do is go take the Melancholy to the grocery store. But if it's a major life crisis, it can overwhelm them because they don't know this about themselves. I'm surrounded by them. They can get extremely unhealthy in their control because they can become Pharisees. Legalistic, rigid, uncompromising, and looking down their nose at everyone else. And they'll quote the letter of the law and they could be as wrong as 2 left shoes. So we have to remind them that if it's not in love, it's not love. And that's one of the clear things with the Melancholy. Okay, now in the area of affection, we have our need for, I like to say, our one-on-one, our deep relationships. It's also our need for love and approval. So these are very important. This is our friend and family zone. This is where that happens the most. And so let's take each of the temperaments through some of these areas. And there's so much more, but for our purposes here, we're just using these as general places to distinguish the difference. So the Melancholy temperament at home or with their crew, they love one-on-one or small groups, and they typically say, I love you by doing things for people. They're more comfortable with a task than with a lot of fluffy words. They don't need a lot of fluffy words their way, and they don't give a lot. They're more into the practicalities of, I'll mow your grass, I'll wash your car, I'll make money for you, I'll provide. But I always like to remind the Melancholies when they hear this, that doesn't make them shallow. In fact, they're deeper than every temperament up here. And here's what I mean by that. Their depth is below the ground that people have to work hard to get to. To get to the heart of the Melancholy, you have to go through American Ninja Warrior. You have to go through all the things. And if you get there, you're stuck for life. Which means that if you reject them after you've gone through there, you devastate them in depths that you'll never know. They absolutely will die for the ones they love. They're loyal. Intensely loyal, but only a few get there. Mm-hmm. And so those few hurt them, it scars them, and they'll remember it, and then they'll want to get back even with them. So the Melancholy is very deep, but they're not expressive. They're very private with it. So their spouses, their sanguine spouses, cannot understand why they just don't want to snuggle and hug. Well, it's because they're 1 or 2 drops a day people. I'm going to chart up here a couple if we have time. And then, so let's go to the supine for time's sake. The supine in affection, they are very, very much longing for close, longing for affection, longing to belong, but they only send smoke signals. They're not very communicative. They won't state what they need. So their struggle oftentimes is unmet needs in the emotional arena and the affection arena because they won't ask. They're very indirect, and then they'll store it up and they'll blow out. Like 3 months later, they'll give you a what for because you didn't acknowledge them and the meal they made or something like that. They're very giving, they're very serving, they're very caring, but they need the reciprocation. They need someone to say, I love you, you're worthy, and those things to the same degree as the sanguine. The phlegmatic, I've always found them to be a little bit more, whatever, I'll put my arm around you, that's fine, but they're not going to be very demonstrative with it, and they're not going to be very much needing a lot back. They're always going to be fine with just enough. I always think of the 3 bears, not too hot, not too cold, but just right. They like for things to be just balanced. So the phlegmatic is always going to be looking for the lack of extremes, but more moderation. And they can become stubborn in their emotions. They can be very guarded with it because it drains them. The choleric, the only temperament I've seen in affection with choleric is my son. He's got a choleric temperament, and he's very much on my terms. He will show his affections when he's ready to, but not any other times. And it's interesting in that I've never seen another choleric in affection. But then the sanguine in affection is hug everyone that walks around. They'll touch, they love everyone. They give and receive. I call them Niagara Falls. And they are just that intense. And they need reassurance. They need approval. They need to be recognized. And if they don't get it, they'll make a mess to get it. They will do whatever it takes to get those things, and they won't even know it sometimes. So if you have a spouse who's a sanguine married to a melancholy, it's very important for them to understand their unique differences there. Okay, so what I would like to do quickly is I'm going to draw how I chart my clients, and I've got some numbers. So what I'll do is I'm talking to them, and I'll usually be quicker in my explanation. I'm going a little bit slower here, but I will draw their numbers up here, and then I will chart them, and we'll say your expressed scores are here. And I don't get into expressed and wanted as much because there's just not time, but for our purposes, we'll go 3, 1, and this is their inclusion. And what we have here is a person that has a little, they're kind of in the middle right here. So they're not all the way over, but the 3, 1 is very much expressing 3, only wanting 1 feedback, which is in the melancholy neighborhood. Close to phlegmatic, but not quite. It would need to be probably up here a little bit more. So there's not a lot of influence from the phlegmatic right now. In the area of control, we've got a 3, 5. So the 5, as Caroline and I have noticed, we go a little bit above. And the 3, 5 puts them right here in control. And the control is right in between the supine and the phlegmatic. So they're actually a phlegmatic supine because they're just a tinge closer. You'd have to see the numbers there. And in that, you've got the 3, 5, you can see the influence of both of these happening on there. And this helps a lot with blends. I like the visual with blends because the blending shows how you can have the influence of both. But here's what's interesting with the chart that I've got here. Because we're 0 to 9, we think 5 would be here, but it's not. It's actually a little bit above. And so that is important. If a 5 is here, that makes a big difference because that is a difference in phlegmatic and supine. So keep that in mind as you chart. And then affection, 2, 4. So we have a 2 and a 4 is going to be roughly in this area here. And again, this is rough, but it's a general idea. So this person can now see they're lumped on this side. You've got a little bit of the different temperaments going on there. We have the melancholy, the 2, 4 is that a melancholy phlegmatic? Who knows?
Which
2,
one?
4.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we have the control is the 3, 5, and that's a supine phlegmatic. Okay. So this is a good showing of blending, and people like to know because they're not just a supine and they're not just a phlegmatic, they're right in the middle, and that helps us visually. So let me show you the spouse real quick, and I'll do this in red. The spouse is a 6, 6, 1, 3. I'm seeing these folks for pre-marriage counseling, and a 9, 9. So we go 6, which is going to be farther over, and a 6 is going to be farther up. So this person's here in inclusion, clearly in the sanguine category, but a mild sanguine, very close to the phlegmatic, but the sanguine in a very moderate sense. In control, a 1, 3, we have a melancholy. So there's probably some tension going on in this person. And then the affection is a 9, 9. So here we go. I just heard Jamie. Know that this has a very deep hold on this individual. In fact, this is driving the bus. And we'll talk about dominance in a while, in a little bit. So when we look at this couple, we have some things going on there. What might be some conflicts or some frustrations or some areas that might be hotspots for them?
Well, I just think in the one spouse here, right, the conflict of being melancholy and control, but having these high needs, for affection. I mean, that's a huge conflict internally.
How would you communicate that to his bride? She's the blue.
Well, I think if we can't manage and understand our own personal conflicts, it's difficult for us to communicate what our needs are, to the one that we're in relationship with. And just having one who is much more expressive, and this other spouse is much more, internal. You can see all of that with thoughts, feelings, and decisions. So that creates another big conflict, because this spouse might override this spouse, thinking, they don't have input or decision-making ability. And this one just might be more impulsive, I think the melancholy probably helps this person a little bit.
There's the brakes.
Yeah.
The brakes are going, but are the brakes working well in this person's life? They're being overrun. So 6 and 6 is 12 and 18. When you add that together, you only have 4 brakes in the sense. But the melancholy is very strong, and it's fighting for control, but oftentimes probably overrun by emotional impulsivity, which is interesting. Something I've been showing folks too, just for interest, is there's an imaginary line that goes here, and up here is a lot of the emotional arena, and here is more black and white. This is non-male or female. This is very much people. So women can be very masculine in their tendencies with their thinking, very logical, because people are just like, women are just so emotional. I'm like, bro, back up. Let me tell you a story. And I always use Ken's illustration of the little 5-foot cheerleader lady, and her 6'7", 350-pound husband was terrified of her. And he was emotional, and she was more black and white. And that really was a great distinction to help them understand that this is non-masculine or feminine in the sense that this is just temperament needs. And so one last thing I really want to include into this is something Jamie taught me, and I think this is super important, and it's helpful for our clients, is I always look at these numbers as gallons. So out of a potential gallons per day, this client has 3 gallons of social energies a day, and they need 1 gallon coming back out of potential 18. So it's 4 out of 18. And that lets you know the inside their head world they're in. 3 gallons a day in decision making, 5 gallons needing to come back, which is moderate, and then 2 and 4. But look at the husband. He's Mr. Energy. He's got 12. He's got 4, and he's got 18. So his 18 is driving him. It is a fire hose. It is there, and he's probably going to be super like arm around her and all the things. And his life is going to be constantly made up of, where's my next fix? Where's my next fix? Where's my next fix? And he needs constant approval and reassurance and stuff. And we always go to God, then go to people. If they don't get that, then counseling ain't gonna work for them. Go to God, go to people. And that's important in this arena right here. Okay. So that's how I'll present this. If I've got fun young people, I'll pull puppets out and give animal things, and I'll do a role play with them. But for our purposes clinically, this is what I do. I get people to take a picture on their phone, and they use that as a little memoir just so they can see the chart there. And it's pretty neat. But then we springboard off of that a lot more through future sessions. But it's good for clinical to get a picture. They understand how it works, and they also understand, wow, this is a big deal, because I'll get really intelligent people in, and they're like, okay, yeah, this is more than a personality test. This has a lot of depth, degree to it, and there's a million miles to mine.
Excellent.
Okay, well, we got it on video, so maybe this will be something
Good
we
job,
can use.
Dave. I just want to add to